Humans are strange. Bleep. But why do the audio emitters produce different acoustic signatures? Twist Under inquired as he examined the earpieces in his grasping limbs for orientation clues. Ranger M. Harlan answered without shifting his gaze from the display. It's why most interfaces have two speakers. And what is directionality? Twist Under pressed, placing the earpieces against his lateral torso experimentally. Harlan paused, trying to unpack the question. So I'm watching this two-dimensional screen here, he said, gesturing at the monitor. Yes, Twist Under confirmed. The Thunderhoof enters the frame from the left. Harlan rewound the clip. Here at 2 minutes 5 seconds, but you can hear it approaching for about 30 seconds before that, right? Twist Under set the earpieces aside and waved his grasping limbs in agreement. So the system knows to route the Thunderhoof sounds through the left earpiece so you know which way to look, Harlan explained. What direction it's coming from. So that is directionality, Twist Under concluded, curling all his limbs beneath him and settling into what most humans on base called his thinking loaf. So humans, he said finally, can determine which direction a predator approaches from by sound alone? Well, yeah, Harlan said. Can't you? No, Twist Under replied simply. Why would we need to do that? We can see where it is coming from. Harlan leaned back and studied the perfect radial symmetry of Twist Under's form. You do have 360 vision, Harlan conceded. But what happens after dark? Or when you're in murky water? Remember that we perceive well into what you call the infrared spectrum, Twist Under reminded him. True blackness or even darkness is very rare for our photoreceptors. Ha, Harlan said. So you just don't get much directional information from sound. And you use sound to avoid predation, Twist Under said. This does explain some, if you do not mind me saying so, odd behaviors of yours. Oh really? Harlan said, leaning back with a grin. Like what? You wish to know what behaviors we find odd? Twist Under asked cautiously, his limbs shifting uneasily out of his thinking loaf. Yep, Harlan said with a grin. Give it to me. Twist Under produced a low humming noise. You swivel when the pressure alert sounds. Yeah, Harlan agreed. It's an annoying beep. You have common names for specific wavelengths of sound dependent on duration and intensity, Twist Under pointed out. Beep, boop, bleep, Harlan said with a grin. That, Twist Under said, raising his grasping limbs eagerly. You name sounds. I guess we do, Harlan said. What of it? You name specific wave shapes. It's just strange, Twist Under said. Just a little strange. Humans are strange. Compliments. Ranger M. Harlan, your venting system is quite fragrant today. Harlan twisted around and peered through the gaps in the inner workings of the hover truck he was attempting to repair. My what is what now? Harlan asked the undulate mechanic who hadn't yet selected a spoken name. The mechanic proceeded to weave his way up through the engine compartment, only to pause just in front of Harlan's face. The alien had shifted to the dusty maroon hue most undulates adopted when out of water for extended periods. It was difficult to get a clear view as he threaded his vertebra-free body through the narrow gaps in the engine. Harlan resisted the urge to pull back as the swarming mass of pseudopods halted just short of his face. The undulate extended one grasping limb and held it in front of his mouth like a microphone. Your venting system, the undulate gestured at his mouth, is quite fragrant today. The undulate gave the portion of himself facing Harlan a wiggle that suggested approval or pleasure. Oh, thank you, Harlan said. Your, color is a lovely shade of maroon today. Thank you for the compliment, Ranger M. Harlan, the undulate said. Harlan blinked at him. I guess I'll get back to fixing this hover truck now, Harlan said, turning back to his work. The undulate wriggled out of the truck, and Harlan focused on clearing out the biomatter jammed in its undercarriage. How did your conversation with companion Harlan go? The commander asked the mechanic as he swam back into the base. Oh, quite well, the mechanic informed him. You were correct, Ranger M. Harlan is quite friendly. Hopefully, I will soon be able to call him companion. The young mechanic paused and wiggled happily. And perhaps he will feel comfortable enough to engage in the petting ritual with me. Perhaps, the commander agreed. Remember that humans do not communicate quite so much through touch as we do, so you must give him time. I understand, the mechanic said. He twisted around as if to proceed further into the base but paused at the door. Humans do give the oddest compliments, though. Humans are strange. We figured. You want to hear the story of the Battle of the Homeworlds? Ah yes, that is a story. Or rather, it isn't. And that is the story. Of course it doesn't make sense, young one. The story is about humans, after all. Have you ever known humans to be logical? No, not individual humans. With proper training they can put up a good front of sanity for years. Not individuals, but groups. Humans as a whole. When they get tribal. What? Of course there is a certain logic to genetically predetermined behavior. Look who is telling this story. That is better. Now where was I? The Battle of the Homeworlds. Now settle down on all your legs and listen. We spotted the humans long before they spotted us. That cursed system, Pequod, the interest of that particular breed of scientist that seeks out the most horrible of everything. Every one of their planets was a forbidden world. Some scorched their rocks under unbearable radiation. Some had no core the probes could find and devoured the probes themselves with planet-sized storms. And the one planet that actually carried liquid water, that gift of the artist, and carried life was as much a forbidden world as any of the others. The axis tilts, the poles are covered in ice. Yes, permanent covers of solid water, young one. Indeed it is horrifying. But most horrifying of all was the sentient life that called that planet home. Yes, humans. Now they are our allies. Then they were terrifying. They nearly tore their planet apart with war. They were deeply tribal. Their warfare tactics. Well, you are old enough to remember the War of the Wanderers. Their tactics are as terrifying and mad as the world that birthed them. Even those mad scientists of ours were terrified. We hoped that their ignorance would protect us. But it was not to be. They were space-hungry. They lusted after the stars. They longed to encounter AI. And in our ignorance we saw them as predators seeking new prey. So we crept from the system and prayed to the artist that they would never leave their planet, that their tribalism and as yet primitive tech would keep them trapped. Oh, do stop laughing, young one. Now we know better. Of course they came and found us. You have read the records of first contact, no doubt. How strong their desire, their lust to meet other species was. We feared that passion. We could not see how so strong a drive could lead to anything good. We learned to work with their aggression and tribalism. But the more we learned, the more we came to fear their concept of vengeance. Ah, you shudder. You remember the passing of Colony Gammax. Yes, you understand why we feared their vengeance. For you see, we knew we had denied them the desire of their hearts. It is figurative, young one. They figuratively say that their desires come from their hearts. Strange, I know. But wherever that desire came from, it was unbelievably powerful. We had spent centuries denying it, hiding, actively preventing them from the discovery of their neighbors. So yes, we feared their vengeance. We did not imagine we could hide it from them forever, but we hoped to delay the discovery until we were prepared. Each homeworld and well-developed colony produced a defense fleet. Smaller colonies were evacuated on the sly and the colonists brought back to the homeworlds. It cost entire industries, whole sectors of economic development crippled. Don't give me that look. We were terrified. We had sinned against the humans and waited for their infamous vengeance to fall. You are laughing again. Do you want to finish the story? No. Good. Now here is why you came to me, I presume. It was on my ship that humanity discovered our sin. I was set in command of a joint scientific task with a human research group. There was a military contingent with them. We stumbled on an old deep space exploration vessel that, unbeknownst to us, had been tasked with removing the last observation satellites we dared leave in the human system. To make a long, harrowing misadventure short, The humans got to the computers first and read the mission logs. I chose to face down the military commander myself when I was informed by my first officer. He suffered a minor aneurysm. Poor thing. Well, I won't bore you with tales of my heroic plans to protect my ship and crew from their vengeance. I contacted Central Communications and gave the code that let them know the gig was up. Every homeworld fleet mobilized and waited for the final transmission from my ill-fated ship. I swarmed onto the bridge of the human ship, and the military commander wasn't there. I was informed by a distracted comms officer that he was in the mess. I swarmed into the mess and found the commander casually sipping coffee. I stared at him blankly until he glanced up and smiled at me. "What's up, Commandant?" he asked. It is a human turn of phrase. Look it up in the databanks. Haven't you read the logs of the satellites? I asked in confusion. I had a summary of the relevant bits, the commander said, taking a sip of his coffee. Nothing too interesting. So I pressed, utterly befuddled. Now where was the rage? Where was the sense of betrayal? Did you see something the human text missed? The commander asked, his interest piqued. Are you not offended? I asked in an embarrassingly high-pitched voice. Offended, he said with a frown, and I could see his brain parsing the data he had. What about? I felt a surge of hope that the humans had missed the relevant data. If we could secure it. Do you mean about how hard you guys avoided first contact? He asked, his face lighting as if he had stumbled upon some minor revelation. My hope died a cold death as he examined me. And yet I had learned to read human emotions. I could see no rage, not even surprise. In fact, it appeared that you already knew, I demanded. He chuckled, at the greatest insult ever offered to a sentient species and turned back to his coffee and reports. Well, we figured. And all the homeworld fleets had to stand down and be dismantled and disarmed, and the cost of our ignorant mistake bled our share of the interplanetary markets for decades afterwards. The humans sometimes think to ask how they came to so easily claim such a share of the trade market, and hopefully they are still as ignorant as we were. Humiliation was no easier a burden for us to bear than terror, but we can't be sure that decades from now it will not come up and some human will sip their coffee and mutter, we figured. Humans are strange. Omnivorous by Betty Adams. So you just eat anything? The breadbox-sized alien's vocal cords were perhaps the closest to a human of any speaking species they had encountered. They tended to be quieter and pitched lower, but the one that Harlan had dubbed Threes had learned to shout early on and knew how to aim his words in the thin air. Well, not anything, Harlan corrected as he tightened the bolts on the underside of the hoverbike he was working on. There are a lot of chemical compounds that are toxic in plants, of course. There are, Threes said, exasperation tinting his voice. It does not serve the plant's ends for you to devour their photosynthetic surfaces. They pump all sorts of anti-predation compounds into their energy-rich biomass. Harlan heard the rustling that was the undulate's version of footsteps and couldn't resist a smile at the image of the giant caterpillar-like creature moving across the ground. Fortunately, a species that expressed its chosen collective name as a rippling motion along the dreadlock-like appendages that seemed to compose the entirety of their bodies, and that varied from individual to individual as well as from subculture to subculture, didn't mind getting named by the other cultures they met. It is far safer to feed on the simpler creatures that the water is practically teeming with. Threes made his way up onto Harlan's chest, and Harlan absently pushed him to a more comfortable position. Maybe safer, Harlan agreed as he reached his hand deep into the guts of the machine, but not as convenient. Not much of the human population lives with enough water to make that a viable option. Threes clicked in distress and moved up Harlan's chest to prod gently at his chin with what Harlan assumed, and hoped, were his frontal appendages. But how? Threes demanded. Harlan grunted and gave the hand signal for needing more information. Apparently, human fingers were one of the best cross-species communication aids that the undulates had ever discovered. Humans like water, Threes explained his query. I know you don't live in it like we do, but you, Harlan assumed Threes was struggling with trying to communicate a complex undulate word position to someone who wasn't looking at him. You swim and I think the closest word is wade, just like we do, and it is a valued exercise. Yep, we do love our bodies of water, Harlan agreed as his hands finally found the loose nut he had been feeling around for. Personally, I grew up near Gig Harbor, went swimming a lot as a kid. But not everyone is so fortunate. Threes pressed forward again, and Harlan shoved him down again. Keep down for a while, Threes. I gotta get this loose. But yeah, some humans can go their entire life without ever seeing enough standing water to wade in, let alone grow enough biomass to feed the population. Perhaps it has something to do with your fantastic biomass and nutrient needs, Threes suggested, trying to keep his voice level. But Harlan could feel the undulate shivering at the clearly horrible thought of desert living. Well, lots of folks even prefer it, Harlan said with a grin. It certainly explains your dependence on omnivorous, Threes speculated. Omnivore, Harlan corrected absently. Threes was particular about his languages and liked to get it right. Humans are strange.